A woman who taught the greatest minds of her age was seized from her carriage in broad daylight, humiliated in a church, and brutally silenced before her remains were destroyed in the streets. This was no anonymous victim of mob violence. This was Hypatia of Alexandria, the most celebrated philosopher and mathematician of the Roman Empire, murdered in March 415 CE by men who called themselves servants of God. Her death was not the result of spontaneous rage, but a calculated act of political violence that would silence one of the last great voices of classical philosophy. In Alexandria, where Greek learning had flourished for 7 centuries, the brutal killing of this extraordinary woman marked the moment when religious authority finally crushed the tradition of open intellectual inquiry that had defined the ancient world. Hypatia's authority in pagan Alexandria. In the late 4th century, Alexandria remained what it had been for generations, the intellectual heart of the Mediterranean world. The city's famed museum and library might have declined from their former glory, but the tradition of learning they represented still commanded reverence throughout the empire. At the center of this world stood Hypatia, daughter of Theon of Alexandria, himself a distinguished mathematician and the last recorded member of the Alexandrian Museum. She had inherited more than her father's position. She had inherited his mission to preserve Greek mathematical and philosophical knowledge in increasingly hostile times. Hypatia taught in the Neoplatonist tradition, following the philosophy of Plotinus rather than the more mystical interpretations that had gained favor elsewhere. Her school focused on the pursuit of truth through reason and mathematical precision. The historian Socrates Scholasticus, writing within a generation of her death, described her as surpassing all the philosophers of her time in both literature and science. Students traveled from distant provinces to hear her lectures on mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. She explained the works of Diophantus on arithmetic and Apollonius on conic sections, subjects that required years of disciplined study to master. What made Hypatia truly exceptional in her world was not just her intellect, but her public authority. She moved freely through Alexandria's streets, appearing before magistrates and civic officials without the constraints that typically limited women's roles. Socrates Scholasticus noted that she possessed a self-assurance and dignity that came from the cultivation of her mind, and that men admired her all the more for it. She never married, dedicating herself entirely to philosophy and teaching. Her students included both pagans and Christians, among them Synesius of Cyrene, who would become Bishop of Ptolemais while maintaining his deep respect for his former teacher. By the early 5th century, Hypatia had become more than a teacher. She served as an advisor to Alexandria's political elite, including the Roman prefect Orestes, who governed Egypt on behalf of the emperor in Constantinople. Her home became a gathering place for the city's educated class, where philosophical discussions mixed with political counsel. In a city increasingly defined by religious conflict, Hypatia represented something that was rapidly disappearing, a space where learning mattered more than sectarian loyalty, where pagan and Christian could study together without violence. Cyril's supporters mark Hypatia for death. When Cyril became Patriarch of Alexandria in 412 CE, he brought with him a vision of Christian authority that left no room for compromise. His appointment had been controversial, and he moved quickly to consolidate power by targeting those he saw as threats to Christian dominance. Unlike his predecessor Theophilus, who had maintained a working relationship with Alexandria's educated pagans, Cyril viewed the city's religious diversity as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than managed. His first major confrontation came with Alexandria's Jewish community. In 414 CE, following violence between Christians and Jews, Cyril led a mob that seized the synagogues, confiscated Jewish property, and drove many Jews from the city. The Roman prefect Orestes was horrified. As the emperor's representative, he was responsible for maintaining order and protecting all citizens regardless of religion. He sent an angry report to Constantinople condemning Cyril's actions and demanding imperial intervention. The conflict between patriarch and prefect escalated rapidly. Cyril summoned 500 monks from the monasteries of Nitria, the desert region where he himself had trained. These monks descended on Alexandria and confronted Orestes in the streets, surrounding him as he rode through the city and publicly accusing him of paganism. When Orestes insisted he had been baptized by the bishop of Constantinople, one of the monks threw a stone that struck his forehead, causing him injury. His guards abandoned him in fear, but a crowd of Alexandrians rushed to protect him and captured the attacker, a monk named Ammonius. Orestes ordered Ammonius subjected to fatal punishment as penalty for assaulting the emperor's representative. Cyril responded by declaring the dead monk a martyr, giving him a church funeral and renaming him Thaumacius, meaning the Wonderful. The message was unmistakable. Those who attacked the prefect were not criminals, but holy warriors deserving of veneration. Even many Christians in Alexandria found this grotesque, recognizing that Ammonius had been killed for attempting murder, not for his faith. But Cyril's supporters understood what their patriarch was telling them. In this poisoned atmosphere, Hypatia became the focal point of Cyril's faction's rage. She was Orestes' most visible advisor, a pagan philosopher whose influence over the prefect seemed to them the only explanation for his refusal to submit to ecclesiastical authority. Rumors began spreading through the Christian community that Hypatia had bewitched Orestes through sorcery, that she practiced magic and used her unnatural learning to keep the prefect alienated from the church. To Cyril's supporters, the power this woman wielded made no sense unless it came from demonic forces. The truth was simpler and more threatening to Cyril's ambitions. Hypatia represented the old Alexandrian tradition that placed intellectual achievement above religious identity, that valued wisdom wherever it could be found. Her very existence contradicted everything Cyril was trying to build. A pagan woman advising the prefect, teaching Christian students, commanding the respect of the city's elite. This could not be tolerated if Christian authority was to be absolute. The Parabalani